afternoon, everybody. I guess I have been given the honor to introduce Dr. Silvy. Dr. Dan Rolke, who we have done this, I believe, in Hawaii. So he said in advance, Miguel, can you do it? I'm honored. Although I only know Dr. Silvy for 20 years, I believe a lot of you have known him for a longer time. Nonetheless, he gave me a few things of the many that you already know, so I'm going to read them. Dr. Silvy is a Regents professor, a senior faculty fellow, and associate department head for undergraduate programs in the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries Sciences. He's a certified wildlife biologist, past president and fellow, and an Aldo Leopold Award recipient with the Wildlife Society. He is also a Hammerstrom Award recipient with the Prairie Grouse Technical Council. Dr. Silvy has published over 275 scientific papers, has graduated 104 grad students, and has been the recipient of 72 academic or professional awards and honors. I believe he's going to present a tour of his 50 years of research being a wildlife biologist. So I know a little bit about those 20 years. I'm eager to learn about those other 30. Dr. Silvy.
Somebody control the lights. I'm not even going to go back further because I was told by Dan to go back to the early years. So I'm starting not back before there was dirt. Well, I would say that when I was born. I was born in Coffee, Missouri, only because my folks lived in Yakima, Washington at the time. But my dad's older brother was dying of cancer. His name was Nova, and I was back visiting, well, I wasn't back, my parents were back visiting, and I was born, and he died about a month and a day after I was born. So that's the reason I was born in Missouri. My first 11 years of my life was spent in Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. My dad worked for the Union Pacific Railroad and ran trains. And Mom and I worked at dairy with my other brothers and sisters, and in the summer I worked at the sugar beet field, went hoeing sugar beets basically. Part of my summers, because we had free access to ride the trains because my dad's work, was spent in my mother's family in North Dakota, and I would help my granddad on the farm. At 10 years of age, I was driving a grain truck into the granary to dump the grain. So a lot of this was, didn't have licenses back then. Moved to Kansas when I was 12. Worked at a local tree nursery and crafted trees and things for several years. My interest in wildlife, I've never lived in a city. Always had a large family garden, and one of my jobs was to keep the critters out of it. And Mom always told us that anything you shoot, you had to eat. I won't tell you what all birds could eat. Fished with my father and mother, especially in Idaho, Washington, Oregon, trout streams. We'd ride horses out and fish on weekends in camp. I hunted with my father, which meant basically I held the geese, ducks, sage grouse, and pheasants that he shot. But and I had a collection of bird eggs pre-law before I was out of grade school. And had all kinds of neat little ones. I'd have little small eggs and large eggs from the same species. But anyway, had a pet deer that the game warden brought to us and wanted us to raise as I was growing up. And I always wanted a pet skunk, but Mom said no. Advanced education, I got an AA degree in Highland Junior College in Highland, Kansas. During the summer I worked employing retail with a retail store, and a lot of plumbers come in and you have to lay out the pipes for them, show them how to put things together. And I go here to my BS, the only date you're going to see here, so I don't want to age myself. But I put that in 1964 because that's when I got my BS in Wildlife and Fisheries Science at Kansas State University. If you add on there, now that's 50 years of being a wildlife biologist. So. And during the summer, I worked in between my degrees. I worked as an apprentice electrician for a year. And probably was the reason that Dr. Robel at Kansas State University picked me to start a new prairie chicken project with radio transmitters, and because of my electronic background, I was selected to do the work. Well, not my career. And after my MS at Kansas State, I stayed on as a year as an instructor, handling Dr. Robel's graduate students. When he was on a Fulbright sabbatical in Scotland for a year. he had it set up for me to go to Scotland to work on black grouse. I had an offer to come to A&M to work on Atwater prairie chicken. But I ended up going to Southern Illinois where I worked on the Florida key deer under Dr. W.D. Clemster. Positions, of course, was all graduate students. I was either a research assistant, most of it, did some teaching in labs and zoology labs and wildlife native techniques. I was a research fellow and also a National Wildlife Federation fellow for a couple of years in my doctoral research. As I said, I was an instructor at Kansas State University as a non-student. I also was a U.S. Deputy Game Warden when I worked in Florida Keys. When I came back from doing my research, I was a staff assistant in the Cooperative Wildlife Research Lab at SIU. And then I was hired here at A&M as assistant associate, went through the ranks of assistant and associate professor here in A&M. I left A&M in 1981, I'm going to give you dates, where I became assistant unit leader at the new Cooperative Fish and Wildlife Research Unit at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service at the University of Florida. It was a brand new super unit, first time they put wildlife and fishery units together. And we're brand new, and of course Reagan came into office. First hurdle I had to get over was they were going to send all of us home, wasn't hired, you know, before such time because they said we're political appointees. I got through that. And then he said he was going to wipe out all the units. And so I would basically just work for the Game and Fish Commission during my short stay there, and I came back to A&M. The reason I left A&M, all my graduate students are going out and working federal government, making $10,000 more an hour like that. But anyway, I've come back and got tenured for the second time and went up through the ranks again. Service, I'll kind of give it a little bit past. I do this for the students. I can't stress enough being involved with your society. As I was president of the Kansas State University Student Chapter of the Wildlife Society. We call it the SIU Zoology Graduate Student Association. And I was advisor to the TMU chapter of the Wildlife Society for many years. My first position was chair of the Student Affairs Committee, and that job we had at that time was to write the rules for the quiz bowls, the national quiz bowls. I probably chaired more committees than I can remember, but I've been president of the state section and the Wildlife Society. And I edited the 7th edition of the Wildlife Techniques Manual. Current, I sat on recovery teams, and we're a recovery team when I was team leader for 17 years. On the South Florida Ecosystem Recovery Team, there's 64 endangered species involved there. I was program coach of the next chapter this year, I think, for the 3rd time. Next year I'll be it for the 4th time. And I've agreed, like an idiot, to do the 8th edition of the Techniques Manual, of which they just haven't signed a contract yet, but I've been asked to do so. Advisory board, I sit on the TXU Environmental Steering Committee that gives out fellowships to graduate students. I also sit on the Jones Ecological Research Center board, a scientific advisory board. It's like the Weller Wildlife Foundation for you people here in Texas, except they got 108 employees and about an $8 million budget, 30,000 acres. It used to be the playground for the president of Coca-Cola, and when he passed, he designated in his will that it becomes a scientific research center. And they usually have graduate students. I know Lee, you've had a student there, and mostly it's out of Georgia, University of Georgia, Auburn, Alabama, or University of Florida. And they have a lot of good students that come in there. I also was on the board of the North American Grouse Partnership and recently been appointed to Council of Scientists for that group. I've served on several committees with the IUCN, but currently on the Grouse Specialist Group. I want to get some teaching history, and I do this for new faculty that think they've got it tough. I was told by Dr. Chair I'd be teaching 3 courses when I came the first semester, and when I got here, Dr. Jack Inglis, for you people who knew Jack, he went on sabbatical, and all my courses changed I planned for when I walked in the door. So I had to take 3 courses in the fall, and then 3 with 1 different in the spring, and then I think it was about 5 days into the summer session, Dear Walking Office says, no one's been assigned to teach animal ecology, and you're it. And I'm only a week late, but anyway. So that had no teaching assistants for labs, and at that time we had no Amandas, and we did all advising students ourselves. I kind of settled in after a while to wildlife techniques 408, habitat management 406, field habitat management 407, and wildlife research methods in the fall. And in the spring, I didn't have to teach the 609, I just had the other 3 courses in the spring and no summer. It was only after Bob Brown became head and Marcus Peterson and Roy Lopez joined the faculty that I was reduced down to WSC 408, 638 per semester. Fall examination, I've never got such good evaluations. I had to put it up there. I pulled up my TA's evaluations and I got 482s, 487s, 489s. I said, man, I'm just going to wipe that out. I never get above 4 or 5 or something like that. And I got a 497. I about fell on my chair. But I had the best class I ever had last fall. So anyway, I have 7 current graduate students and I'm on the committees for 16 others. So that takes a little bit of my time. Research career, I'll cover that a little bit. BS, before that, working with BS, I was an NSF undergraduate research participant, developing methods of trap grade of prairie chickens for graduate students at the time. And that was interesting because NSF paid me $180 a month and the graduate students are making less. And man, I took a beat from those graduate students because I made more money and they didn't like that. But anyway, my MS, I continued on research on the greater prairie chicken in the Kansas Flint Hills. And then I did research for my PhD in Florida Keys. I'll give a little background on research in Texas. My first project was on mourning doves and quail. Basically, we looked at 133 21-mile transects. They took a half mile each end. And looked at the vegetation types along those transects and correlated that with mourning dove call counts or bob and scale quail whistle counts. And so that took us all over the state of Texas. A lot of you know I worked on Atwater prairie chickens since I think dirt was invented. I've been accused of putting them all to extinction. They are in the wild. Actually, a paper was on that. But look, I got to review it and was able to refute the premise behind that. I'm involved in many field studies with Atwater and also involved in techniques to learn how to rear them in captivity. Also involved with the lesser prairie chickens in the Panhandle of Texas, both in the northeast part of the Panhandle and the southwest part of the Panhandle. That's a species, in my opinion, that's pricing faster than the Atwaters and is in deep trouble. Usually don't work on mammals, but I've worked on mountain lions and bobcats. And it seems every time we had a faculty hired to do predator work, they last year or so, and I didn't take care of the students. Yeah, it was always on how to control predators, basically, the project ended up. And I've done some research with students on feral hogs. Some major findings, quick, they determined the habitat needed for the Atwater's prairie chickens. Developed methods for captive breeding of Atwater prairie chicken. Discovered REV, which of course graduate students are involved in all this. In prairie grouse, discovered REV, which is a reticular endothelial virus, which actually kills prairie chickens and turkeys. Discovered Trichosaugus cramii and Atwater prairie chicken. Tenuous and red grouse would be deadly to red grouse. Discovered that eggshell membrane contained DNA of chick and not that of the hen laid the egg. And developed non-explosive drop net for wildlife. Up to that point, people use charges, and a lot of people run around with fingers or less fingers, and they started out with that. But anyway, a lot of research in Florida Keys. There I work on endangered mammals. I'm going to give you a presentation outline. I'll give you a little more here because a lot of you may not be aware of all the stuff that I'm involved with there. I work on endangered species. There's only 5 mammals in the Florida Keys. The one's not shown here is a raccoon. He's the only one that's not endangered. You got the Florida key deer. You got the rice rat, the Lower Keys rice rats. You got Lower Keys marsh rabbit, and you got the key larva wood rat. They're all endangered species in the Keys. And I've had students working on all of them. I'm going to give you a little background about the Florida Keys. I'll give you some research highlights and some future considerations. Just starting with vegetation type. Vegetation type is influenced by the tides. With increasing elevation, the maritime zone transitions into hammocks and pinelands, which is a higher elevation. Most of my work was done on Big Pine Key, which is the largest of the lower keys, bigger than Key West. It's 6 miles long, 2 miles wide. The highest elevation is claimed to be 8 foot. It's a question that it's that high. But as you transition through there, I'll go through some of the vegetation types. As you get from sea level, over there on the left, you hit the mangroves. There's 3 mangroves. You can see the red mangroves right at the water edge, and that's the one of the prop roots. Then you get into the black mangroves. They send up a little aerial above the water roots. And then you get into the white mangrove. And some people will call it buttonwood, which is 4th mangrove. But that you get into, buttonwood can take salt water, but it can't take it for long. The mangroves can take the salt water. Then you usually have a little depression where you get a freshwater marsh. Then you go up into a hammock, and maybe in between that and Pine Line, you get another little depression, we got freshwater marsh. And that's where those lower key marsh rabbits prefer to be. Okay. Now, in the Keys, there's been another vegetation type. And this is the one that people want to be right on the water's edge. So what they've done is dredged and filled. And you can see, in that case, you don't see they've gone into the mangrove and buttonwood areas and filled. And they brought it up to the level almost of the freshwater marshes. And they built houses, and people want to get in their house, jump in the canal there, head right out. Okay. By the way, it's 78 there today. Some research highlights. I'm not going to talk about all these. I'm going to talk a little bit about survival mortality, and I'm going to talk a little bit about habitat use. Not so much on population structure, range and dispersal, a little bit on climate variability. Survival mortality, about 50% of the total deer mortality is due to road kills, and half of which occurs on US 1. And on one stretch, US 1 covers about 3.5 miles that goes across Big Pine Key. And there's about 1.25 miles of that where half of that roadkill occurred. And it was in a non-industrial area where shops and things were. And so we ended up recommending that road be fenced. And we developed underpasses for the deer to go under the road, and then because there are roads coming into that fenced area, we had to develop what you're probably used to cattle guard, but we had to come up with deer guards so deer wouldn't cross and get into the highway. And so probably all my research papers, that's the one I think has the most impact since somebody took it and used it. Okay. In the last several years, traffic levels have increased. Last year we had a record 197 deer killed of an estimated population of 600 to 800. Of course, there has not been a true estimate since Dr. Lopez did his PhD down there in 2003. So I suspect there's a lot more deer. One thing, female survival is greater than male survival because males in a rut, their only mind's on one thing, that isn't watching cars on the road. Habitat use. I found deer, when I did my research, were all called, I called it the historical study, he called it the hysterical study. When I worked there, they were wild. When he was there, you could lead him under a nail with a cookie. But anyway, when I was there were 500 people on Big Pine Key on the 6,000 acres. When he was there were 5,000 people. So the deer became adapted. But I found used 26 different keys. The majority of them, 3/4 of them were on Big Pine and No Name Key. So what I've done here is I picked a Sugarloaf Key where it's got low deer density. You can look at the mangroves over there and the hammock, and you can see a lot more leaves than you can on No Name Key where you got high density and a browse line on red mangrove and also everything they can reach in the hammock. By the way, the nutrition on mangrove, red mangrove, it's got about as much protein as alfalfa hay. Basically, we got too many deer, endangered species, and that's a problem. It's hard to convince Fish and Wildlife Service, though, to maybe use contraceptives, especially on No Name Key, where we got real problems with them. Majority of deer in these islands, the little spots there are vegetation transects where we checked what the deer are doing. And that key said, well, why didn't you work there? Well, that's all wet mangroves, so with the higher areas on the islands. But again, basically, in these 2 islands, we've got too many. We've translocated deer to other islands, trying to build up the population some of these lower keys, etc. And then we've lost some from a couple of keys. Although I'm not sure the refuge ever gets out there to check on them. I think future research, we've looked at hurricanes. When Hurricane Georges came through in 1998, we had a lot of, Roel was down there, he had a lot of deer with radio transmitters. We only lost 1 buck, and it looked like what happened, he got rolled into the red mangrove roots, got his big antlers hooked in there, and he couldn't get out. but I don't know, there was probably 40 deer you had radio trained, even little fawns, all of them survived. When Hurricane Wilma came in, we didn't lose anything. Now, that's a different story for marsh rabbits. So we had 8 foot, we transported the marsh rabbits out of Boca Chica Air Base down there, Key West, over to Little Pine Key. That population's taken off. We put some on Water Key. Hurricane Wilma came in from the Gulf side with 8 foot of water over Water Key, and we lost our rabbits. You know, deer are great swimmers, so they can swim off and on, there's no problem. Interesting thing, and Lee, that I'm interested in doing, and one time Jim Terry asked me, Silvy had all the money, and what would you want to work on? I'd say box turtles in the Florida Keys, because 8 foot of water went over that Keys, and we went out to check on our marsh rabbits, and they were all gone, but here were box turtles. Actually saw a couple mating at the time. So they survive all that and do well. And of course, sea level rise is a big issue. You know, Big Pine's the highest of all those keys in elevation, maybe maximum 8 foot, but it can be a major problem. We've done a little bit of work on it there using LiDAR. These are water holes. Water is important for the deer, fresh water, because they need fresh water to drink. So showing on Big Pine and No Name Keys, the water holes, and what a 1.5 foot sea level rise would do. It would wipe out all the water on No Name Key. So that's going to be a major problem. And you say, well, is this happening? In the last 100 years, it's risen 9 inches in the Keys, and it's rising faster. We're seeing now on a lot of these islands, I mentioned the buttonwood, that's kind of the transition zone between the mangroves and more upland habitat. You can go on a lot of these islands, like Sugarloaf, some of these others, and the buttonwood's all dying because of salt water is intruding into those areas. So it is a major problem. Those deer like hammocks and pinelands. They like the higher elevation. That's today. If we get a 3 foot rise, that's all we're going to have left. So the big question is, what's going to happen to the key deer? Well, people say, well, let's move them up to the mainland. We've done genetic studies. They're more closely related to everybody's deer than any other species. The same species, just subspecies. But the neat thing about a key deer is that if you look at the skull, the width to length ratio, they're almost baby face. They don't have they never get the long, elongated nose like northern deer do, and that's when they call them toy deer. They're not very big. They're, you know, an adult buck, live weight would be 80 pounds, and a female pregnant maybe 65 to 70 pounds. So basically, they're small deer, and what are we going to do? If they're a product of their environment. If you move them to the mainland, they're going to breed with the other deer, and you're going to lose them all. Well, you know, people are talking about maybe putting them in zoos. There already are some in zoos. They don't breed them in there, but where would you take them back to? That's the big question. You've got to find some place. If the sea level rises, it isn't going to drop out overnight again. So there's some major problems. One of the things I gave a talk on sea level rise, in fact, on key deer in the Florida Keys to a lot of people. And in Key West and on Cudjoe Key, that's where the waste management people have dumps. And down in near Key West, they call the big dump down there Mount Trashmore. And it rises about 25 to 30 feet above sea level. And so if someone asked me, I had that slide held back, where would the key deer end up with sea level rise? And I'd throw them Mount Trashmore. Because there's vegetation there, but that's not going to support a lot. Important future research areas, and this is not just for me, I think for everyone. Water is a limited supply. You've heard about California drought right now. I hear they're flooding here in the last couple of days because of rain, but still, it's very important. I think that is a great area for future research and how it affects wildlife. Climate change and sea level rise, it's going to affect all ecosystems because animals are going to be forced out of the ones they're in if they're near the coast, and it's going to make changes. And, you know, if you're talking about a 1.5 foot sea level rise, you're talking a lot of New York City going under. So people are going to be moving. Changes are going to occur. So I think that's a big area that we need to look into. Well, I'm supposed to just talk about my last 6 years. The Scientific Journal articles 38, referee proceedings 8, edited books 2, book chapters 5, other publications 1, and then I've graduated 14 students during this time. Honors and awards, about 2 a year there. I got some advice to graduate students. I think mentors are important, and who you work for is very, very important. Those mentors I list there, Dr. Robert J. Robel, you may know him as a Robel Pole person. He taught me what I know as far as education goes. Dr. Willard D. Clemser taught me all about politics of the wildlife profession. He was president of the Wildlife Society when I was there. He's the one who appointed me as the chair of that student committee to redo the bowl rules. And then, of course, Dr. James G. Tier, who's passed there last year, hired me. We'd go to meetings together, we'd stay together. He introduced me to all the right people. He got to know the right people. He got me with people that had money or whatever. And I owe that to all three of those people, all three in the past. For you students now, go to meetings. That's very important. That's how you're going to become known. Present your work at meetings. That's how you become known even better. And people will come up to you and talk to you about your research. Do not be afraid to approach leaders in the profession. There's a progression. When you go, first year student, you're just trying to maybe find a better graduate program or find a job. And then if you become like me, assistant professor, then you're there looking for monies or grants or contacts. Pretty soon you're like me now, and you're just going there to meet old friends. Okay? And sometimes we're sitting there lonely and we just like to have someone come talk to us. Okay? Accept leadership responsibilities. It can be committee chairs, being an officer of the society. I'll tell our student chapter here of the Wildlife Society, the best job you can have is a program chair. That's better than being president or vice president or secretary of treasury, because they take all these people they invite in to give presentation. It could be the director of Texas Parks and Wildlife, it could be U.S. Fish and Wildlife, out to dinner, the program chair does. And you spend 2 hours or better with them. How better get to know someone? You got, I used to tell students it was 25% of who you knew and 75% of what you knew. I reverse that. It's 75% of who you know. Several years back, I had an undergraduate in my class tell me she looked for a job with Texas Parks and Wildlife. She says, I can get the governor to write me a letter. Should I do so? I said, hell yes. Yeah, and interesting, you know, after she got the job, that letter disappeared out of her file. Anyway, but you got, we had a big meeting for Texas After Wildlife Society last week. Over 700 people and probably 350 students there. We had probably 200 of the Texas Parks and Wildlife game biologists there. Now, best way to get a meeting was probably at the bar, but don't get drunk. Sit there and talk with them. You know, they like to talk to students. Again, publish your research, and you got to make yourself different than anyone else. Okay, and you know, that means you got to take courses that nobody else wants to take. You know, I took a lot of stats. In computer science when I was a PhD student, just to make myself different than most PhD students. Advice to faculty. I do want to pick on any group of faculty, so I just put faculty. But pick great students. Recommendation from only those people you can trust. Now, I've got a network of people, when they tell me they got a good student, I know it's a good student. When Monty Whiting called me up and said, I've got this guy over here at Stephen Fox State University by the name of Roy Lopez, you better grab him. I grabbed him. And that's what it takes. Make sure they are funded and the project is funded. Don't take students unless you got funding for them. That's the disservice to the student. Work with them on the project. Just don't send them out in the field, go with them. I try to go, if I'm trapping, anything with the students trapping, I'm there with them, okay? Help them with their thesis publication. Just don't let them on their own. Work with them on that. Encourage them, you know. I'll tell you, the first paper I ever wrote, I gave it to Dr. Obell. Every sentence, it was double spaced, it was typewriter back then. Every sentence had red written in, after every one of them. And he says, this is good. He says, you just need to get it into style and get it edited. Yeah, it didn't look good to me with all that red on it. Anyway, it got published. But again, he took the time to do that. And by the way, Dr. Clemster was an English teacher before getting into wildlife, so he was even more strict. Encourage your students to publish early. I mean, don't wait until they're done. If they're partway through and they can publish something, a technique or something, get it out. That's a big help to them. Remember that graduate students do all the work, and we just take all the credit from them, okay? But I will say that because they do the work. Do not give untruthful recommendations. Your reputation is on the line. In other words, you may say, oh, this is the best student since canned peaches And if that isn't true, you could be in deep trouble. Nobody's going to take any of your students from then on. You know, you try to be fair. As I tell my undergraduate class, there isn't one of you in here that's got just getting out with a 2-point or getting out with a 4.0 that I can't find a job because you're more qualified for that particular job than another. And I'll try to fit you where I think you're best fit. So anyway, be there for them even after they leave, you know, your program. They're going to need help after that. They're going to need letters of recommendation. They may ask you about certain things. I won't mention the name, but I had a faculty at one of the university, one of my former students called me. He had taken on a new graduate student. The new graduate student had been on board maybe 3 or 4 months, died in childbirth. The baby was okay. What should I do? My advice, you know, they've got to set up some kind of trust for that baby. Because the father was a forestry major, probably making less than $30,000 a year. So anyway, they come to me and ask me fatherly advice. I try to give them the best I can. My future plans here were disrupted. I was going to retire, at least reduce my time in fall of 2012. Spend winters here in Texas and summers in Florida Keys. My house in the Florida Keys. Basically, it's a lot cooler in the Florida Keys in the summer than it is up here, and you get a good breeze. And there's too many tourists down there in the wintertime. It's opposite of what most people think. But anyways, as long as Beth's here, I'll remain in Texas. So if you want to get rid of me, get Beth a job in Florida. If you want to get here, get her a job here in Texas. Okay? My plans for the future. I'll continue to teach 408 and 683. To serve as associate department head of my research. I'm going to become more and more selective on any new field research projects that I take. I've agreed to edit the 8th edition of the Wildlife Techniques Manual. I'll work with Dr. Lopez on a key deer book that we're starting to work on. And I want to work on book until it goes to the Texas prairies on the 3 grouse species. Now, I put this in here just for Dr. Masser, because I'm going to show you the real side of I'm going to end it there. And you always heard about Deadwood senior faculty, so that's what I want to become. But anyway, I'm going to end there and take any questions.